Why is this for? Not for me. Okay. Well, welcome home. I think it is the sober way of welcoming you because the gravity of the moment doesn't give much space for flamboyance or rhetoric. Good that you come here at this ambassador conference to discuss, to see each other, to engage with the staff in Brussels. We can be proud to be in one of the largest diplomatic corps and networks in the world where the European Union institutions rely. It will be 1 week. It shows that it is not just a formal exercise, but to go deeper into discussion. I will not be with you the whole week, and maybe not even on Friday, because I've been called to go somewhere else in the world, and particularly in the Middle East, and you may understand. But it's clear that we are living troubled times. When I presented the strategic compass almost 2 years ago, I said Europe is in danger. And it was before the start of the Russia war of aggression against Ukraine. It was before the major current crisis in Sahel. It was before the flooding up of the conflict in Israel and Palestine. And certainly, I think that we all agree that I don't remember a time when I could say that Europe is in danger and facing so great challenges. We have seen the explosion of violence or rivalry, together with the climate and ecological crisis, which aggravates the security risk with countries in the region and in some places becoming unbearable. People cannot live in some places in our neighborhood due to the climate change. So the coming month will be for sure, the coming month, not the coming years, the coming month will be for sure a moment for defining the global peace and the future of our world, and for the security and the global credibility of the European Union. So let me start by talking about this event. Dear colleagues, dear ambassadors, this is a moment in which we have to have a look at the world disorder and to try to look for references that goes beyond the classical wording on disorder and crisis. In order to have this talk with you, I try to put my ideas in order, getting away from the phones and from the daily events than the never-ending flow of news, which are most of them rather depressing. Well, the first conclusion that I got from my thinking on these days is that more and more we are living in a world characterized by a greater multipolarity and fewer multilaterality. The world is full of poles. Not all of them are equal. We are very, very far away from the world in the 19th century, following the Vienna Congress, when 5 European powers steered the world. And multipolarity is not only referred to military capabilities and wealth. It's not only the military and the economy. It's also about the thinking, about different truths and different approaches to the world. It's clear that in strategic terms, we have to cope with 2 big superpowers. They are not fully at par yet, the United States and China. But look, when China opened to the world in the middle of the 70s, it was 1% of the US GNP, 1%. And today it's 80% of the US GNP. Amazing, no? In short time, from 1% to 80%. This is going to mark, this new bipolarity is going to mark our future, but there are other poles. In fact, there are maybe a dozen of poles which are strong and indispensable regional actors. And we are one of them. We are in an intermediate position. We are not a full-fledged great power. We are not a military alliance. We are not even a state. But we are much more than a regional power. And on this world, everyone is trying to bargain with everyone. And there is not a clear consensus on values and on desirable outcomes. It is a fragmented and transactional world. Certainly, this description is oversimplified, but it's clear that the fact that there are plurality of different actors, it increases the entropy of the system. And it has an impact on multilateralism, which is weakened due to the lack of global consensus on values and interests. And you can see that at the United Nations, where the United Nations Security Council is unable to reach any kind of agreement, and then they go to UNGA, and then UNGA bypasses the vetoes of the Security Councils, and these decisions are rarely implemented because they are not binding. And even the Security Council resolutions are neither implemented. So in this context, we have to continue fighting for multilateralism because it is the best recipe against power politics. And we Europeans, we have to reflect on how we can revive multilateralism. I hope that during this week, a lot of ideas will come from you, among ourselves, in order to, from your experience, from the field, to think about it. Now going to concrete things. I'm not going to talk about everything because it's impossible, but let me start with the most burning issue, which is, of course, the explosion of violence that we had witnessed since the 7th of October 2023. When I woke up this morning, by the crisis room phoning, I had the same feeling that I had on February 2022 when the bombs started falling in Kyiv. I had the feeling that this was a moment that was going to determine the future for decades, and we were in an inflection point in the history. The unfolding tragedy in the Middle East is the outcome of a collective political and moral failure, which the Israeli and the Palestinian people are paying a high price for it. And this price will continue increasing if we refuse to see the situation as straightforwardly. This moral and political failure is due to our real lack of willingness to solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem. Yes, we committed formally on the two-state solution, but without having any credible roadmap to achieve it. And today the substance of the Israeli-Palestinian problem is not religious nor ethnic. It's a national problem. It's the problem of two people who have an equivalent right to exist on the same land. So they need to share this land. And please have a look at the Obama paper, the Obama thoughts on Israel and Gaza. It's very inspiring. Yes, two people on the same land, they have to share it. And the problem is that today we don't have any kind of agreement on the terms of this sharing. Oh yes, we had. Remember Oslo 30 years ago? Yes, we had. But we have not implemented it at all. That's the problem. And in the meantime, the violence has increased. The figures are appalling, really, not just on the last terrific attack of Hamas against the Israelis and the answer from Israel. It's not just about it. Since 2008 to 2023, before the 7th of last month, the number of wounded and casualties, it was really too much. What has happened? Why Oslo agreements have not been implemented? Because the forces of denial in both camps have continued growing under the hubris of some and the desperation of others. In Israel, the colonization of the West Bank has been progressing with impunity and violence against the Palestinians, and this has become even more brutal after the 7th of October. 30 years ago, there were 270,000 settlers in the West Bank. Now there are 700,000, almost 3-4 times more. In Palestine, the total lack of perspective and diabolic calculations aiming at favoring extremist forces have led to the marginalization of moderate forces to the benefit of radical forces stunned by hate. And last year in the West Bank, there were 154 Palestinians killed and 20 Israelis. This year to date, this number is almost 400. And the barbarism of the Hamas action against Israel civilians, which is absolutely injustifiable and inexcusable, puts us in front of a paradox that in the recent years, we believe that the Israeli-Palestinian problem was to be circumvented even if the situation in the ground was continue deteriorating because of the Abraham Accords. And this illusion was shared by everyone, not just by us, by the West. And it was believed that by many that the normalization, desirable normalization of relations between the Arab states and Israel would bring peace between Palestinians and Israelis. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. Even someone like Jack Sullivan said before the 7th of October that the region had never been so calm for decades. Never been so calm for decades. So how can we explain such a blindness? How can we interpret these contradictions? For me, the crux of the matter is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is no longer an Israeli-Arab conflict. What is now is becoming a religious or civilization fight. And listening yesterday, President Erdogan threatening the West, saying, look, do you want again the fight between the Crescent and the Crusades, le croissant et le croisé? These are strong words. And we have to do everything we can in order to avoid this confrontation. On the Israeli side, extremist forces on the West Bank determined to put an end to the Palestinian problem through submission or exile. And in the West Bank, Hamas is not present. On the Palestinian hand, the rise of Islamist extremism, who want to destroy Israel and threaten the West, who, on their views, we protect Israel, and certainly we do. But as Obama said, the way Israel prosecutes the right to defense matters. And there is not a successful military operation without a political strategy behind. And the military strategy of Israel has also to abide by international law, including the law that seeks to avoid, to every extent possible, the death and suffering of civilian populations. Ignoring the human cost could ultimately backfire. I am mentioning Obama, but I can also mention a citation from Condoleezza Rice, who explains very clearly many years ago, in 2011, that we see always the same scenario. Hamas provoke, Israel responds military, and the international community wrings its hands. And Condoleezza was saying 12 years ago, this time is not different. I wonder for how many years all the U.S. secretaries will have to look for the fine line between the Israel right to the self-defense and protect U.S. interest with a broad of allies and friends. the overreaction of the Israelis at the end makes them to lose the support of the international community. And it comes once and again. 2011, 2023, we are in the same place. Well, what do we have to do? First, I think that we Europeans, we have the moral and political obligation to be involved, not only by providing aid, but contributing to a durable solution. We have a certain experience on the state building, and our capacity to contribute to a political solution will be a major test for our credibility. Certainly in the short term, the first priority is to break the peace of violence. And this is not going to be easy, because the humanitarian tragedy in Gaza is unprecedented. President Biden has been asking Israel not to be blinded by rage. And I think this is the message that the best friends of Israel have to send to them. Not to be blinded by rage. The right to defense has to be performed in accordance with international law, as the European Union Council has stated. But one thing has to be clear, we will not go back to the situation of 6 October 2023. This has to be an opportunity for peace. This is the core issue that we have to address. There is no military solution to the conflict. Without a political strategy, no one has to win a battle against the terrorism. You can crush people, but everywhere we have to look for political solutions. Even if Hamas is uprooted in Gaza, this will not solve the problem of Gaza, let alone the West Bank problem. So overreactions are always understandable, but never effective. And the words of Condoleezza Rice resound to me as if they had been said this morning. They were 12 years ago. I think that we have three responsibilities. We must continue sticking to a firm but balanced position, and to avoid importing in Europe this conflict at all costs. Only in France, since the 7th of October, it has been 1,000 anti-Semitic acts. This has to be fought. Anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim sentiments are totally unacceptable. And I want to thank you here in person, the work of our teams in the ground, for their remarkable contribution for me to be fully informed about how the daily conflict are going on. The second is that humanitarian solution, call it truce, window, whatever. But we need that violence recedes and the international humanitarian law being respected. From this perspective, I think that a humanitarian pause counterbalanced by an access to hostage by the international community of the Red Cross as a first step to their release is an initiative in which we should work. A massive increase in humanitarian support, the evacuation of third country nationals from Gaza, a proportionate Israeli response. All of that is necessary, as necessary it is to keep channels of communication with Israel, with the Palestinian Authority, with Qatar, with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, and of course the US and the UN. But the important thing is to think about a comprehensive and definitive settlement which is clearly out of reach today. Today is out of reach. But on the modalities of a political process involving Israel, the Palestinian Authority, the Arab states, the European Union, Turkey, United States, and Norway, who has been playing an essential role in the past. If we don't succeed, this is the last chance for the two-state solution. If we don't succeed, we will be definitely in a spiral of violence and mutual hate for generations. So let's engage on that as much as we can. It will be the most important geopolitical challenge for us. But not the only one. Don't forget about Ukraine. More than ever, Ukraine is a struggle to fight against the Russian invasion. Ukraine loses, we lose. We need to keep our unanimity and our unity in supporting Ukraine. We are the first provider of support to Ukraine. We are, more than the US. You know the figures. The prospect of membership, the development of a substantial economic and financial assistance program, military aid through the European Peace Facility, bilateral channels, the provision of security guarantees are essential components of our work. And this must make the Ukrainian military offensive, which is facing hurdles, to contain the Russian invasion and to recover its territory. You know, the Russian losses are very important, but Russia can repower. It's ready to sacrifice even more men and equipment without any concern about what is the human cost of that. Before Putin, Stalin believed that quantity is itself a source of quality, as human life had no meaning and not value. What is unbearable for the Ukrainians in terms of human cost is maybe bearable for the Russians in the short term. So the only solution is to continue engaging, supporting Ukraine and remaining united on that, because our core values are at stake. Beyond Ukraine, we should not miss the challenge of the enlargement. Ukraine has come a new candidate and is pushing the queue of the former candidates who were waiting for years. And the whole queue will move. And I think that we have to recover the time that we have lasting in an endless process of membership. Both wars are different, completely different. There are causes and consequences. But let's be frank, the crisis in the Middle East is already having a lasting impact in our policy in Ukraine. During my recent visit to Washington for the summit, together with the two presidents, Commission and the Council, I had the opportunity to express my concerns directly to President Biden and my colleague Blinken that our international support for Ukraine may erode in the light of what is being seen as the practice of double standards. This is an acute problem that all of you have to contribute to fight. All our delegation has a huge responsibility to build a counter-narrative adapted to our local interlocutors. A large number of countries in the global south see in Ukraine it's not a global issue. It's a regional problem which affects Europe and the US, the Western world. It's a West problem. Solve it, and quickly, because we cannot bear the consequences of this war. And they will take advantage of the crisis in the Middle East to underscore what they see as a contradiction in our positioning, or even a contradiction among Europeans, as expressed during the last United Nations resolution vote. I think that we have to reaffirm our support to the United Nations and the Secretary General, who is making huge efforts on all fronts, and you, as ambassadors, you have an important role in order to accommodate your language to different contexts, talking as much about resilience or sanctions as to talk about containment, building, and reconciliation. This is part of your skills. This is part of what I am expecting for you. But never make the mistake of framing global issues in terms of the West against the rest. We have to reject this mental frame. It would be devastating on our perception in Asia, Latin America, and in Africa. We are not the outpost of the Western world. We are the keepers of global and shared values based on United Nations Charter. And this is the alpha and omega of my message. We are the keepers of global and shared values based on United Nations Charter. Everywhere, every time. This is our message. It's not the West against the rest. It's the values of the United Nations Charter as the best ground of the multilateralism. Please convey this message loudly. Knowing that every country in the South has its own circumstances and values, and they consider that they have no reasons to place the Ukrainian challenge above their own priorities, which are related to climate change, digital transition, indebtedness, and they want a better representation within multilateral institutions. Yes, it is an expression of this multilateral world I was talking at the beginning, and we have to take care of that and understand this mental framework. It's not the West against the rest. We are the supporters of the values of the United Nations Charter as the basis of multilateralism to save the peace in the world. And then apart Russia, there is also China. How not? China is the big elephant in the room. I was in China last month, and we will hold the next EU-China summit in 1 month approximately. I went to China and I conveyed 5 key messages, which seem to me what should guide our policy toward China, our foreign policy, determined by the European Union Council. First, we don't have any desire to block China's rise or to engage in a strategic competition with it. And we don't have any difficulty in clarifying our position on Taiwan to Beijing. We will continue developing multifaceted ties with Taiwan, which don't imply recognition of its sovereignty. Second, remain firm on the idea of systemic rivalry with China. They don't like it. I understand. But I explained them to my Chinese interlocutor that certainly in some things we are rival because we defend different socio-political systems. And the rest of the world is looking at us and trying to choose between the one and the other. And China aims to roll back our universalist view of rights and taking the countries of the South, which sometimes are closer to Beijing than to us, as witness. We have to accept this rivalry confrontation with China. But being rivals doesn't mean that we are enemies. We are just representing different eco-political systems. So this will go to other arenas. They will go also to the digital technology and artificial intelligence that will frame the way the society works. Don't try to escape. Yes, there is a rivalry, an intrinsic rivalry, because we have different socio-political systems. We are not enemies. We have nothing against the rise of China. It has a role to play in the world. We need China. But the third point is that we make China to understand that it will be difficult for China to maintain its access to the European market at a time when European companies are finding it increasingly difficult to work in China. We have a gigantic trade deficit, 400 billion a year, and growing very quickly. 60% growth in the last 2 years. This is not due to a simple difference in competitiveness. This is the China argument. This abyssal deficit is largely attributable due to the very high level of public subsidies granted to Chinese companies, as well as to the ever-increasing barriers to entry into the Chinese market. And the problem is becoming more acute as the China's export leads affecting our main industrial sectors in which we have had traditionally an advantage, automotive and chemical industries. If China continues to deny the reality and consequences of this imbalance, it runs the risk of seeing a rising demand in Europe for more protection. We are not protectionist, but maybe we have to protect ourselves. If China don't open, maybe we will have to close. And this is something that has to be discussed, and it makes me to go to the fourth point, de-risking. De-risking is not designed to get out of China, but simply to do what China is already doing, to diversify the sources of supply and therefore diversify risk. I told them in the Beida University that we are just following the advice of President Xi when he said China needs to build a domestic supply system that is independently controllable, secure, and reliable, so that the self-circulation can be accomplished at critical moments without having strong dependencies on others. Okay, this is de-risking the Chinese characteristics. And we have our own de-risking, which at the end is more or less the same thing. Common sense. But common sense doesn't need to be with a bellic accent or ideological dimension. It's just a matter of organizing better our interaction with this very important partner. And I think that the Chinese authorities should be much more worried by the fact that the European foreign investment in China is decreasing. The ones who are there stay, but there are no newcomers. The newcomers have new opportunities in the vibrant Southeast Asia economies. So China should be much more worried for that than for our de-risking. I want to stress the fact that economic security is an important part of our foreign policy. But it has not to be presented as an anti-China plot. By the contrary, we need China. We have to increase the level of cooperation with China. Its systemic weight is so great that there is no chance of solving any one of the world challenges without a strong engagement from China. China is burning more coal than the rest of the world together. So how can you pretend to solve the climate change issue without a strong engagement from China? It's important to continue cooperating and continue putting clearly what do we expect from China. And I personally told to the Chinese friends, I expect you to do more in Ukraine. We don't expect China to take our position, but yes, to engage more with Ukrainians, particularly on humanitarian aid, and convince Russia to get out from Ukraine. Well, I should talk about Armenia, Azerbaijan, Libya, Ethiopia, Sudan, Yemen, Iran, GCPOA, Myanmar, Afghanistan, Serbia, Kosovo. Don't worry, I will not do. First, because it is impossible. And secondly, because I want to put my attention in two transversal issues which are very important, I think. Transversal. One, security. Remember, I am the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy. And security policy. And we need to strengthen our security policy. This has to be understood in the broader sense, not just military. Economic security is becoming an increasingly central part of our foreign and security policy. It doesn't mean that we want to close. On the contrary, we want to develop more investments and trade links all around the world. The global gateway is there for that. We have to abandon the old-style extractivism. Where is the lithium? Where is the lithium? People in Latin America look at us as the one who comes once again looking for minerals. No, it's not a matter of where are your minerals. It's how can we build with you partnerships in order to use your natural resources, you add value, and you benefit from our demand. We have to have a look at the Inflation Reduction Act consequences. It's not a minor thing. And we have to continue working for the enlargement, which is maybe our most important foreign policy. In the meantime, the European political community has to be developed. And on security, I am very happy to say that the strategic compass is going step by step, advancing. We hold the first military exercise among European Union armies out of the NATO framework in Spain the other day, almost 3,000 soldiers from 9 European Union countries. This is the rapid deployment capacity on the way, on the making, and it will happen. And it will be the greatest contribution of this legislature, to make the security policy high in the agenda. A word on Sahel. Sooner or later we will suffer the consequences of what happens there. More military juntas means more insecurity, more instability, more migratory flows towards Europe. Our strategic patience has not led results. In Niger, our lack of unity among Europeans has weakened the answer of ECOWAS, and we have failed to support African solutions for African problems. One of these mantras that we repeat, like the two-state solution, that in practical terms doesn't follow. All in all, we are making progress in the field of security and defense, but much more has to be done. We need more financial needs, and we need more coordination among our armies. The second transversal thing is the relationship with the Global South. Global South, I don't like the word. There is a complex set of people, very heterogeneous, with different positions. But it's a concept that has been through the public debate, and now today is being used by them. So we cannot avoid the fact that they call it and they feel it as being something that exists. As an answer to the West that dominated the world in the last 500 years, we understand now that it's over intellectually, but I think that we haven't taken yet the consequences and the practical conclusions of this new reality. Yes, the majority of the countries has condemned the Russian aggressions against Ukraine, but it has been doing a lip service. Our sanctions has not been followed by many. And the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict will increase the accusation of double standards. There are two things that have to be taken into account when we talk about the resentment against the West. One is the pandemic, and the other is the climate change. Have a look at the graph of the number of vaccinations across the time since the pandemic started. And you will see that in October 2021, 2 years ago, we, the high-income countries, we have had 1.4 doses per head, 1.4. If you were an inhabitant of a low-income country, you had 30 times less. 0.04, 30 times less. Yes, we have been the greatest provider of vaccines. Yes, we have been the greatest exporter of vaccines. But the reality is that when we had 1.4 doses per head, they had 30 times less. And this was a matter of life or death. And they had that very much present. They were lagging behind us. And the second thing is climate change. If you talk about climate change, keep in mind that we are responsible for almost 25% of the cumulated global CO2 emissions, almost 1/4. Africa, where there are 3 times more people than here, is responsible by 3%. And South America is responsible by 3%. So it's understandable that they tell us, yes, there is a problem. Certainly there is a problem, but who created the problem? Certainly not us. You created it. So it's clear that we have to be ready to facilitate more support for the green transition. But keep in mind the socioeconomic situation of the people around the world. There are 600 million people in Africa that have never seen an electric bubble. Never seen an electric bubble. So don't tell them that they have to be green and digital, because they will say, what are you talking about? I never seen the computer screen. I never seen a bubble lamp. So green and digital, what does it mean? I want to eat. Their priorities are different. We think on 20 years horizon. They think on 20 days horizon. And this has to be very much present on our approach. Because yes, they have to contribute to the fight against climate change, but there is a shared endeavor that comes from different responsibilities. And we Europeans, we have done our part. When we promised 100,000 million euros to support the climate transition, we have done our part. Sell it, explain it, because it seems that we haven't done. Much has to be done, more has to be done, but don't forget what we have already done in order to help the South on their green transition. Our partnership with South Africa marks a good way. African Union being member of the G20 marks the way. They have to be more engaged with international structures, financial institutions. We have to let them room. Because when we created this world order, many of them didn't exist. They were colonies. And others had such a small economic influence that they didn't count. Now they count. And they are independent countries. And they want to have the capacity to participate on the building, not of the order that was built 70 years ago, but the order that will come out of the challenges we are facing. So support Ukraine actively against the Russian disinformation. We have to keep an eye on our societies, not to get tired of supporting Ukraine. Fight against the tyrannous, showing that our policy in the Middle East is first and foremost a principled policy rooted in international law. Never forget to mention that when you talk about the right of Israel to defend, which certainly has, and has to use it, and make everything you can in order to strengthen our links with the global South. In 30 years from now, no, in 25 years from now, 1 out of 4 people in the world, 25% of the people in the world will be living in Africa. This is a youth bomb, and we know it. And the youth in Africa, young people in Africa, doesn't want to be a problem. They want to have the opportunities. But can you imagine 1 out of 4 human beings will be African? And 4 of the 6 more quickly growing countries in the world are African. Africa is not just a land of misery and migration. It's not just a land of wars. Yes, they are, a lot. It's also a land of opportunities, and where humankind will be growing. And we have to be more active in Africa. We wanted to say that we were partners of choice. How we succeed on that? I think that not enough. If we want to be the partners of choice of Africa, we have to do more. Have to do more in all fronts. I put you a lot of duties to do. I count on you. This is a critical moment. Work hard. Thank you.